Hey, what's going on, gang? Nate on the Stone here. Welcome back to my channel. Remember when Terry Jones threatened to burn a Quran and everybody lost their minds because this was obviously a case of Islamophobia? Now, by the same logic, if a group of people marched around on American streets saying F Jesus, we should be able to catalog that as a clear example of Christophobia. Well, Black Lives Matter activists were shouting that, and nothing happened. It was shared around on the social media vortex, and then it faded away into the background as every outrage and "can you believe this happened?" fades away in order to make room for the next thing that we collectively can't believe just happened. Now, this is nothing new on the part of BLM, just a natural progression. Earlier this year, we saw these activists and their allies attack St. John's Cathedral in Washington, D.C., the so-called Church of the Presidents, as well as St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City. And we've also seen them burn crosses and even Bibles. All that would be disturbing and terrifying just as it is. But there has also been an uptick in the number of churches that have been not only vandalized, but actively attacked. This past July, Stephen Shields drove his car into Queen of Peace Catholic Church in Ocala, Florida, poured gasoline in the foyer, and then set the whole thing on fire as people were in the church preparing for morning mass. That same weekend, the 249-year-old San Gabriel mission founded by Junipero Serra in California was torched. This attacking and burning of churches is actually eerily similar to what has been happening in France over the past several years, with the burning of the cathedral in Nantes this past July just being the most recent example. And when it wrote about that story, LifeSite News listed other churches that have also been burned and or attacked. Saint-Jacques in Grenoble in January 2019, where arson was confirmed at the end of last year and attributed to the extreme left by Father Loic Logadet, Vicar General of the diocese. Another church was badly damaged near Rennes on June 29th of this year, in a fire that spread from the main altar. According to the authorities, an electrical incident was to blame. The Church of St. Paul of Corbeil-Essonnes near Paris was also hit by a fire 2 weeks ago. The evidence suggested that it was a case of arson, as there were signs of attempted forced entry into the neighboring catechism classroom. 2 years before, aggressive tags had been painted on the building. But it's not just arson. In March 2019, Newsweek ran a whole story about other modes of destruction that French churches have been subjected to. Vandals have smashed statues, knocked down tabernacles, scattered or destroyed the Eucharist, and torn down crosses, sparking fears of a rise in anti-Catholic sentiment in the country. The Newsweek story's headline declared that French authorities were still uncertain as to the motive behind these attacks, which I'm sure is going to be the official line here stateside that will run alongside the usual messages of great sorrow and brokenheartedness from the usual gaggle of useless priests and bishops who would rather talk rather than do anything, but that's a rant for another time. The real reason for these acts of destruction against churches is actually really simple, gang. It's revolution. And I know that that is a very bold claim to make. In the past, on this channel, I've made it a point to call BLM, Antifa, their allies, and their campaign of violence an insurrection and a mobocracy, to show very clearly that it is more destructive and more serious than just a couple of random riots, and definitely not just peaceful protests. Never mind what the official lie is by the media and by our cultural elitists. But to actually say that this is the work of a revolution and revolutionaries, that is a bit bolder, and that actually might even rub people the wrong way. After all, revolutions are a thing of the past. They're relics of the 18th and 19th century that we just study in history classes. They don't happen today, and even if they did, revolutions would be forces for good, because revolutions, as we know, only happen when a people rise up against tyranny for their freedom. And we should know this better than anyone else. America itself was founded on revolution. Revolution is in our blood. Not exactly, though. Revolutions actually, by and large, are really bad at either deposing tyrants or in securing the liberty of the people once said tyrant has been deposed. The American Revolution actually is the exception that proves the rule. The French Revolutions of 1789 and 1848, for example, yes, there were actually two of them, both ended up with absolute rulers taking over the reins of government, actually profitably in the first case, and not so profitably in the second place. The revolutions that took place in Germany, Italy, and Austria, also in 1848, all failed. The Bolshevik Revolution in Russia and the Cuban Revolution traded corrupt, inept, brutal governments for pretty much more of the same, just under different management. And because these different managers happened to be communists, not only were they inept, brutal, and corrupt, but they also actively tried to remake their societies in their own ideological image. The American Revolution only succeeded because it was a revolution prevented, not made, in the words of Russell Kirk. In other words, the end goal of the American Revolution was not to completely remake society or the world. It was simply independence. And furthermore, in order to attain that goal of independence, it built upon what had already been constructed in the past from the classical world, British history, and Christianity. But to get back to the point, why exactly is BLM/Antifa destroying churches a sign of revolution? Because it follows the basic premise of revolutions, a change of metaphysical and religious principles. The English poet Samuel Coleridge, who was an early 19th century disciple of Edmund Burke, argued that epoch-making revolutions occur because of the rise and fall of metaphysical and religious systems. And my hero, John Adams, agreed with this sentiment 100%. In a letter that he wrote to Hezekiah Niles on February 13th, 1818, Adams wrote, quote, "But what do we mean by the American Revolution? Do we mean the American War? The revolution was effected before the war commenced. The revolution was in the minds and hearts of the people, a change in their religious sentiments of their duties and obligations." This again mirrors what the 20th century historian Christopher Dawson argued, that religion is the foundation of all civilizations. So it naturally follows that if the religion of a civilization is changed, then the entire civilization is going to change along with it. Take the French Revolution as a case study. In 1789, France was the dictionary definition of a Christian nation, with the Catholic Church being the official religion of the country, which it had been since the conversion of Clovis at the end of the 5th century. Just 4 years later, in 1793, and Christianity was practically outlawed in France, politically and culturally. Priests were arrested and guillotined, churches were stripped of their religious symbolism, and even public worship was outlawed. Even the calendar changed, with a 10-day week replacing the 7-day week for the express purpose of obliterating Sundays. The most famous attack against Christianity from the French revolutionaries was the creation of the cult of reason, with the Cathedral of Notre Dame de Paris being converted into the Temple of Reason. The statues of the ancient kings of Israel that graced the exterior of the cathedral were beheaded. An artificial mountain was actually created inside the nave of the church itself, and a classical style temple was placed on top of that mountain. Statues of philosophers like Voltaire and Rousseau replaced statues of Christ and the saints. And in that temple, on top of that artificial mountain, was an actress portraying the goddess of reason, who was actively being worshipped by the mobs that entered the new Temple of Reason, while scantily clad women danced and pranced around, singing hymns to liberty, daughter of nature, as well as to the revolution itself. This 180-degree turn didn't just happen overnight. In the middle of the 18th century, a change took place in the French bourgeoisie, middle-class merchants, artists, and lawyers all across the country. They accepted what historian Henry May has dubbed revolutionary enlightenment, a strand of the Enlightenment which preached the innate perfectibility of man while he was here on earth, and which also preached that it was the duty, the sworn duty of the enlightened to lead the masses to this perfectibility. And one of the strands of this perfectibility just happened to be the utter and complete rejection of Christianity. Christianity, because of the wars of religion in the 16th century, was deemed by the radical enlightened thinkers to be unsuitable for peace and harmony among people. The very fact that it ignited people to slaughter each other over the nature of the Eucharist and the existence of purgatory not only proved that it was no good for peace, but also proved that it was irrational to boot. As such, deism, the belief in the so-called watchmaker god, a god who created the universe, wound it up, set it in motion to follow the laws of nature, and then went off to play shuffleboard, became the coin of the realm for radical enlightened thinkers. Deism, in fact, was supposed to lead to the peace and unity which Christianity had been unable to bring to Europe. This message became linked to the French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who after his death became literally the patron saint of the French Revolution. The revolutionary governments of France dedicated memorials to him as the liberator of France. And more to the point, Maximilien Robespierre, who became one of the leaders of the Committee of Public Safety, which in turn became France's executive branch after the execution of Louis XVI, was one of Rousseau's most ardent apostles. French Enlightenment, the radicalization of the bourgeoisie, Rousseau and his philosophy combined to create not only a political revolution, but a religious one as well. And since the Catholic Church was seen correctly as being an integral part of the Ancien Regime, the French revolutionaries just had another reason to utterly destroy it when they came to power. BLM and Antifa are doing the exact same thing that the French revolutionaries did. They know that Christianity is one of the cornerstones of the American Revolution and of America herself. The culture from colonial times up through the end of the 19th century was Christian. The vast majority of the founders and the common people at the time of the Revolution were Christian, and it was just taken as a basic fact that religion and morality were necessary ingredients for a good, virtuous Republican government to actually have a chance of success. And so Christianity, in all of its forms, must be destroyed if America herself is to be destroyed, which, if we can just be honest for 1 second, we all know is the end goal of both BLM and Antifa. Succession, warlords, promising that all cops are going to die, setting up guillotines outside of Jeff Bezos' house, and chanting death to America kind of lets the cat out of the bag there. Ironically, BLM and Antifa understand this more clearly than many people on the right. Outside an occasional unimaginative slogan or declaration that America is a Christian nation, the right has really not done much to actually preserve, promote, or defend Christianity in the States. We've talked before here on the channel about the devolution of American Christianity into moral therapeutic deism. Well, now it has reached the point, according to the Christian Post, that 50% of American adults, including 30% of self-identifying evangelicals, don't believe that Jesus Christ was actually God. It's safe to say that if you don't believe that, then you're not a Christian, regardless of what label you slap onto yourself. And this actually explains the lack of outrage over the de-Christianization that we actively see taking place right in front of our eyes all around us in society. And it also explains the lack of outrage over churches. Churches now, remember, being openly desecrated and vandalized and burned to the ground. If you want further proof of this religious revolution, look no further than the left's reaction to President Trump nominating Amy Barrett to the Supreme Court to fill in the recently departed Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seat. The left has assaulted the country and our ears with dark assertions that if Amy Barrett is put on the court, she will work to overthrow women's rights, healthcare rights, workers' rights, and all because she's Catholic. More direct, commentators like Elizabeth Bruning at the New York Times have even openly asserted that Barrett's Catholicism is a problem, saying that her confirmation to the court would be a direct attack on the American ethos of liberalism and American democracy. Setting aside the preposterous nature of the claims themselves, the left is doing this for a very simple reason. When Barrett says that she's Catholic, she doesn't mean that in a cultural sense. She's not saying that she was baptized Catholic or she was Catholic at some point in time. She still is Catholic, and more to the point, she is actually a genuine believer. This is actually why when President Trump nominated her to the 7th Circuit Federal Court, Senator Dianne Feinstein, memorably now, said to Barrett that the dogma lives loudly in you. The, of course, open implication of that message was that Barrett was too Catholic to be on the American judiciary. And it is her genuine faith that triggers everyone on the left, because her faith, her Catholicism, her orthodoxy is a direct attack on their religious revolution. If Barrett was a Catholic in the mold of, say, Anthony Kennedy, Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden, they wouldn't have a problem at all. In fact, they would probably welcome her with open arms. But Barrett doesn't seem to be Catholic in the way that Pelosi and company have twisted Catholicism in order to fit their own personal lifestyles. And that's why the long knives have come out, especially because the position and the seat that she's being nominated for is a lifetime appointment. To undermine and ultimately defeat BLM, Antifa, and the radical left is going to require a religious revolution on our part. Now, it won't look like the religious revolution that has taken place on the left. Instead, it will actually be a return to what our faith, whatever that faith may be, actually teaches. So in other words, it will be a realigning towards orthodoxy. If we don't, the sad truth of the matter is that the other side will win. Because, fact of life, something always beats nothing. But as always, what say you? Do you think that we're living through a philosophical and religious revolution? Are philosophy and religion that powerful today in 2020? And if you disagree, what are your reasons for that? As always, let me know your thoughts, ideas, and opinions in the comment box below. Well, that about wraps up everything for right now, gang. Thanks for making it to the end of the video. And before you go, if you could smash that like button and share this video with your friends on social media, I'd be obliged. And if you like videos about culture, politics, religion from a unique POV, then subscribe to the channel, ring that bell for notifications so that you will always know when I post new videos like this every week that you're not going to want to miss. Thank you as always for watching, for giving me a bit of your day. Thank you to everyone who has already subscribed. I appreciate you all. Until next week, gang, stay safe, stay free, by daring to read, think, speak, and write. Talk to you later. Ciao.